Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our presentation this evening. I think you'll have a really fun time listening to this program. Just the title is really interesting. House of Gucci, a true story of murder, madness, glamour, and greed. Can't get more interesting than that, can you? So tonight we have the author of this publication, Sara Gay Forden, joining us. She wrote the original bestseller about 20 years ago and recently published or republished an Afterword. The Afterword came out in November, and it was coinciding with the opening of the motion picture, The House of Gucci. Sara spent 22 years in Milan, and during that time, she really did a lot of the fashion writing for Women's Wear Daily, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg News. This was covering not only the Gucci's, but Versace, Armani, Ferragamo, Prada. It must have been a very interesting job, is all I can say. And she wrote the stories that basically this was the time when a lot of the major, what we know as the major houses now, went from family to really big brand operations. So just to tell you that also we have Sara is she's the lead. I have to read this here. She leads a team of reporters for Bloomberg News that covers. Now this is interesting. She got a very interesting life, this lady. That covers corporate influence in the nation's capital and the escalating scrutiny facing giant technology companies such as Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook. It's really quite timely and interesting, and I'm sure an exciting account to have. The moderator for this program this evening is one of our council members from DC, Julia Bellotti. I'm sure you remember Julia from some of the other programs. Excuse me. She is a former cultural exchange recipient, and she's now on our council in DC. She is a government contractor here in DC, helping people from different agencies and organizations share information with each other as the director of training and outreach at Tesla Government, Inc. And that's not the car company. So I would like to turn this over to Julia and to say definitely Sara, our guest speaker.
Thanks, Diana. So good evening, everyone. Just a couple housekeeping items. I do recommend going up to the view in the top right-hand corner and selecting side-by-side speaker option. That's gonna let you be able to see both Sara and myself easily when we are going through our great presentation and discussion today. In addition, as Sara is presenting, feel free to put your questions in chat. We are going to have plenty of time for discussion. And I know I have several questions. I'm sure you will as well. So feel free to put those all in chat. I'll be monitoring and we can get through everyone's questions after her short presentation here. Otherwise, I encourage everyone to listen and enjoy. And Sara, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you so much, Diana. That introduction was really spot on. I like to joke that I traded Gucci and Armani and Prada for Google and Amazon and Facebook. So that may be another book. But tonight, I'm delighted to be here with you. And I think this is actually the perfect audience to talk about House of Gucci, because I really envisioned it and experienced it as an Italian-American story. And it was really America's love affair with Gucci and Italian style that fueled the growth of this iconic brand over the years. So I just put together a short presentation because I know not everyone has had time to watch the book or see the movie. So I think it'll help us all be on the same page, and it'll give you a little insight into how I came to write the book and how I approached the book and what went into it. But then I'm really excited to move on to your questions and to really have a lively discussion. So this is, Diana said, this is the cover of the movie tie-in edition. The original edition came out 22 years ago now, in 2000, and it has the red cover, which is also a favorite of mine, but it doesn't have the afterword, which, as Diana says, I wrote for the new edition, and that covers the highlights in the Gucci story, both the family and the company in the 20 years since I wrote the book. So House of Gucci is a family saga spanning 3 generations, and it intertwines the story of the family and the rise and fall and rise again of the Gucci brand. It starts with the murder of Maurizio Gucci, who was the last member of the family to run the firm, by his ex-wife, Patrizia Reggiani. So spoiler alert, but it's well known now that Maurizio was killed in broad daylight in Milan, although it took 2 years for the authorities to arrest his ex-wife, Patrizia. But it's not just the story of a family saga. It's really the history of the Gucci brand, set on the backdrop of the Italian fashion industry. So I tell people it's not really just a fashion story either. It's really a history of the company, kind of as a pioneer, and the whole Italian manufacture and craftsmanship industry behind it. It talks about the iconic products, which I'll go through in this presentation, and how they were developed. And it talks about how Gucci went on to achieve new success after there were no members of the Gucci family running it anymore. It also covers the trial of Patrizia Rajani, and I sat through the whole trial. It was a 5-month trial. I wanted to be in court every day to get the flavor of the gestures and the testimony that was being made. And towards the end, the financial takeover battle that pitted Bernard Arnault, the king of LVMH, and Francois Pinault, who at the time had a company called PPR, which is now called Kering, and how they had an all-out battle for control of Gucci. So as Diana said, I was living in Milano for 22 years. I moved there as a business journalist, so I didn't have in mind that I was going to cover the fashion industry. But while I was there, I realized that the fashion industry was the big business story. And as Diana said, this was a time when the family ateliers, Armani, Versace, Missoni, Ferret, were all taking off and expanding both geographically and just in terms of their products and their reach. At the time that I decided to write House of Gucci, I was the bureau chief and the business writer for Women's Wear Daily, which is kind of considered the Bible of the fashion industry. And that gave me literally a front row seat onto the development of the story. So I covered it for 6 years before deciding to write the book, which meant that I had a lot of access. I had a lot of information. I had some of the key players agree to help me with the book, like Domenico De Sole, like Don Mello, who Maurizio brought in to help turn the brand around. I interviewed more than 100 people, including family members, workers. I went to the factories. I talked to store managers, friends. And my goal was to use the techniques of literary journalism. So use the techniques of fiction to tell a true story. So everything in the book has been researched and documented, but I tried to write it like a novel. Although if you have read the book, you'll know like there's so many surprising twists and turns in the story that if I had made it up, it wouldn't have been credible. So this is really, it's a real case where the facts are actually stranger than fiction. And it was really Maurizio Gucci who inspired me to write the book. I met him at his first press conference in 1991 in Milan. And he was giving his vision for how he was going to turn around his family fashion company. And I thought it was important to cement his legacy. But we'll go on to talk more about Maurizio. Who was Maurizio Gucci? He was shot in cold blood in March of 1995 as he was walking into the doorway of his building in Via Palestro. That's in downtown Milan. For those of you who know Milan, it was right across from the Giardini Pubblici. And it was actually right down the street from my offices. We had an office in a big building in Piazza Cavour, which was called the Palazzo dell'Informazione. And that was the press building. And that's where most of the news media had their offices. So that morning, when I heard the news, I ran down. I was leaving my apartment more in the center of town to go to work, and I ran straight to that building and that doorway, and it was already a crime scene with the tapes up and the carabinieri and the emergency responders and the paparazzi. And Maurizio was a key figure because even though he lost control of Gucci, he was the one who connected the past with the present and the future. And he was the one who had the vision to restore it to the top tier of the luxury market. He wanted Gucci to be like an Italian Hermes, so very, very high end. And this is a picture that was taken by my former colleague, Art Streiber, who's now a successful photographer in Los Angeles. And it shows Maurizio in the office in Piazza San Fedele that he had refurbished. And behind him on the wall, you see his father, Rodolfo, and his grandfather, Guccio. And this, to me, underlies his determination to show them that he could make Gucci great again, even though they were no longer there. So I think Gucci is also emblematic of the struggles that many family companies had to make that quantum leap to an international market. And the saying goes, the first generation creates, the second generation expands, and the third generation destroys. And that's not always true. And there's some great examples that I can mention later. But I think in the case of Gucci, it was almost true. And Gucci was on the verge of having to bring its books into the courthouse. They say portare libri in tribunale. That means when you can't balance the accounts, you have to declare bankruptcy. And Gucci was this close to going bankrupt before Maurizio was forced out and his financial partner, Investcorp, took it over. So I wanted to start with the beginning. This is also an origin story. You'll see there are many, many narratives in this book. So the origin story starts with Guccio Gucci, who was born into the Tuscan merchant class. His parents had a straw hat making factory outside Florence. They were not, nobility. They did not come from the lap of luxury. They were struggling to make ends meet. And as a young man, Guccio went away to London to try to find a fortune. And he ended up getting a job at the Savoy Hotel. And the historians weren't able to document exactly what job he had, but it was a low-level job, maybe a porter or a dishwasher or a bellboy. And that gave him a crucial vantage point that ended up being influential. And that was he could see the elite European traveling class, and they were traveling with beautiful clothes, but also with beautiful luggage to put their beautiful clothes in. And the leather, the craftsmanship was something that he knew from his hometown of Florence. And so when he returned to Florence, he opened the first Gucci shop in 1921. So last year they celebrated their 100th anniversary. And there's some, depiction of him that I gleaned from his grandsons and other people who had known him. But he was very thrifty, and he was the kind of guy who would top off the bottles of mineral water from the tap, and slice the prosciutto extra thin so it would last longer. So he was not the big spender. That came later. So his oldest son, Aldo Gucci, is a key character in this book. He's Maurizio's uncle, Rodolfo's brother. And he's really the one who we see push the expansion of Gucci. And he was very charismatic, very authoritative. He was the one who was like the marketer, par excellence, before there was even such a thing as marketing. And for example, he came up with the story that the Guccis were saddlers to nobility because he thought people needed a story to buy these luxury products. He was also the one who came up with the phrase, which you'll see in the movie. Al Pacino is like leaning up against the fireplace at a family dinner after the meal, and he's telling Lady Gaga, who's Patrizia, quality is remembered long after price is forgotten. And he had that saying embossed on leather plaques in gold letters and set at strategic points around the stores, because he wanted to persuade his customers to buy that expensive handbag and focus on the quality and not on the price. And it was very exciting for me. In September, I was in Italy and went to Florence, and I visited the Gucci Museum, which is definitely worth a visit. And I have a Gucci garden shop there. But I also got a private tour of the Gucci archive. And when I started writing the book, I collaborated with the woman who Gucci had hired at the time to develop the archive, Aurora Fiorentini. She's a fashion historian. She's still working in Florence. She's with the Polimoda fashion school. And she is no longer there, but over the past 21 years, they have expanded this archive immensely, and it is now housed in the building on Via delle Caldaie that was the original workshop for Gucci. And I have a photo of it in the book. It's where all the leather workers went. They had the big wooden tables and the skins hanging up on the walls, and they have a beautiful frescoed ceiling that is still there. And they have several of these plaques, quality is remembered long after price is forgotten, that they must have recouped from somewhere over the years, and those are also now in the archive. So who was Patrizia Reggiani? She came from outside Milan's industrial elite. She was actually her mother was from Modena. So for humble origins, she was actually born out of wedlock. And then when her mother married Fernando Reggiani, Fernando also adopted Patrizia, so she would have his last name. And her mother moved them to Milan when she married, before she married Fernando, and eventually they all moved in together as a family. And yet Silvana really, really pushed Patrizia not only to marry well, but to marry a big name. So when they met, Maurizio and Patrizia met at a party in Via dei Giardini, that first time they saw each other, they fell madly in love. He with her, but she also with him. And even though she was kind of considered a social climber, I do believe that she really did love him. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. She also came to feel that he was not very effective as a businessman, and started pressuring him to really make changes at Gucci. And she could see that other fashion labels were overtaking Gucci, and she wanted him to be kind of the big luxury CEO in town. And this started to feel very restrictive to him. So he left her in 1985 when she was really putting the pressure on him over the Gucci company. So fast forward, he was murdered he lost control of Gucci in 1993. They were already divorced in 1991, but she was furious and really felt that it was something that he had done to her, because she was still very identified with the Gucci name. It wasn't until 2 years later that she was convicted of arranging his murder. She was sentenced to 29 years in prison in Milan San Vittore jail, but she was released in 2016 after serving 18 years. So she's now living in her mother's home in Milan, a free woman. I wanted to mention Dawn Mello because I think it's important also to acknowledge her contribution to the Gucci story and to the Gucci transformation. She was one of the sole women who had risen to the top of the American retail market. She became president of Bergdorf Goodman, and she turned Bergdorf around from a kind of what had become a sort of dusty department store to one of the top places to go for luxury. And the other reason this is interesting to our story is that at the time that she was trying to turn around Bergdorf's, all of the big French fashion houses had signed exclusives with all of Bergdorf's competitors. So it was Macy's, it was Saks, it was I. Magnin, and they wouldn't sell to Bergdorf's. And also Bergdorf's was only one store, whereas the others had chains, so they were more lucrative. So how was she going to get, sophisticated American women into the store if she didn't have top tier brands? Well, she started buying the Italian brands. And so she was one of the first retailers to bring Armani and Prada and Jill Sander, which was a German brand, but it was made in Italy. So she really became the pioneer of made in Italy in America. So I just wanted to share that. And she was very happy in her job. She had a beautiful corner office overlooking Central Park. She thought she had reached her peak. And Maurizio came to her and totally romanced her with the idea of turning around Gucci. And after she walked out of that meeting, she knew her life was going to be forever changed. So he brought her over and she started out, figuring out how to bring the sparkle and the shine back to the Gucci label. And one of the key things she did was she hired Richard Lambertson, who started designing some of the first high-end accessories. And she hired Tom Ford, who, as we know, went on to become kind of the designer overall who was associated with Gucci in its turnaround years. So just a few words on some of the icons. Got to start with the bamboo handled bag, which dates back to the 50s. And actually the story behind the bamboo was very interesting because that came out of the pre-World War II trade embargo that had been imposed on Italy. And it was very hard for them to get some of the precious leathers and skins that they needed for the bags. And so they started, this is also a story about Italian resiliency in times of crisis. And so what did they do? They started experimenting with materials that they had on hand and that were plentiful. And one of these was bamboo. And so the workmen learned how to warm the bamboo over a flame and slowly bend it into this handle shape. And when they shipped the bags or sent them home, with the customers, they put the little strap around to keep the handle in shape so it wouldn't spring back. Well, Alessandro Michele, fast forward to the modern Gucci, he really liked that little leather strap and thought, well, why not make it a thing, a chicca? And so you can see in the modern photo, he made the little strap an electric yellow and put it on the outside of the bag. And so if you want to play with that, you can. But that's where it came from. Another iconic bag is the Jackie bag, which was made famous by Jackie Onassis. And this also shows a real evolution of the style of Gucci, because even though the bamboo handle was iconic, it was also very uncomfortable. If you try wearing it on your shoulder for a few hours, it hurts. And so they evolved into the softer leather strap and then the soft shape that fits really nicely under your arm. And yet it's also roomy, so you can, it's very practical for a stylish woman. She could keep a lot of nice things in there too. The moccasin came a few years after the bag with the horse bit. That was a real hit. And one of the reasons was it really expressed the ease of Italian style. So it's elegant, it's chic, but it could be worn with dresses, it could be worn with pants, it could be worn on planes, for travel without being uncomfortable. And women loved it. And so did men. And actually I have a book on my desk, which was all about the lobbying industry in the 80s. And the floor of Congress at one point was nicknamed Gucci Gulch, because all the lobbyists were wearing Gucci loafers. And then again, fast forward to the modern era, Alessandro Michele also reinterpreted the moccasin as a slide, a fur-lined slide, which everybody thought initially was ridiculous and would just be a showpiece but never sell. And it actually became a sellout and was one of their top-selling items in the collection. The Flora scarf also has a lovely history. That was created by Rodolfo, who really took up the oversight of the Milan shop. And one day, Princess Grace Kelly came into the store and he gave her a tour. And at the end of the tour, he wanted to give her a gift. So he gave her a bamboo handled bag. But she demurred and said, no, it's too much, too extravagant. And he said, well, what would you like? Do you see something else that you would like? And she said, well, maybe a scarf. Well, the only scarves they had at that time in production were the little pocket scarves for men. And he didn't think that was appropriate for a princess. So he gave her the bag anyway. And as soon as she left the store, he called his artist friend, Vittorio Accornero, who worked with the Como silk industry. And he asked Vittorio to design a scarf that was a cornucopia of flowers that would be suitable for a princess. And so Vittorio got to work and he designed this beautiful scarf and they had it printed up. And now it's also one of the icons of the collection. And again, when I was doing the tour of the Gucci archive, I saw that they have many designs by Accornero, original designs framed and on the wall, and including the Flora. So that was very exciting to see. So of course the family feuds punctuated this story, and I'm just hitting the highlights here just to give you a sense of the level of dysfunction that went on. Rodolfo disinherited Maurizio when he married Patrizia because he was opposed to the marriage. Paolo, who was Maurizio's cousin, sent his father to jail for tax evasion because he suspected him of siphoning off funds into offshore accounts and then turned all the documentation over to the IRS. He also turned in Maurizio for allegedly forging his father's signature on the company shares that he inherited, his 50%. And that's actually one of my favorite stories in the book and also in the movie. Maurizio's driver, loyal driver, Luigi, got a tip-off that the Guardia di Finanza, the financial police, were coming to raid his office. And he told Maurizio to run down to the basement, jump on his Kawasaki, and speed away over 3 hours to Switzerland, where he had inherited a chalet in St. Moritz from his father. And the key thing, which they don't tell you in the movie, but is in the book, is that Switzerland did not and still does not have an extradition treaty with Italy. So as long as he was there, he was safe, and he managed to run the company for over a year in exile from St. Moritz. So at one point, this was a very litigious family, and there were a lot of disputes also over the trademark. Paolo also wanted to start his own line. And so at one point, there were more than 20 family lawsuits raging on both sides of the Atlantic. And it was so extreme that one of the judges in New York, when she was overseeing a case, she said that she actually knew for a fact that something like 70% of the price of every wallet was going to pay lawyers' fees. There's also anecdotes in the book of bags flying at family product meetings, ashtrays. One morning, the watchman goes to the Scandicci factory just outside of Florence. This was the bigger factory that they opened when Via delle Caldaie got too small to maintain all of their production demands. And he saw the windows open and he saw handbags scattered in the grass around the factory, and he thought there'd been a robbery. And he rushes in and he realizes that there was no robbery, but there'd been a family product meeting the night before, and there'd been disagreements, and handbags had flown, and they'd flown out the open windows and been left on the grass. So just a few moments on Gucci today. It's owned by François-Henri Pinault's company, Kering SA. It's a K-E-R-I-N-G. It's a French conglomerate. Gucci went on to become a multi-brand group under the Pinault family. The creative director is Alessandro Michele, who is Italian from Rome. And he actually worked for Gucci for more than 20 years because he was hired initially by Tom Ford and Domenico De Sole. And he knows all of the historic references, all of the codes of the brand, all of the iconic products. And he's also extremely creative. So he's really been able to breathe new life into the brand today. And his products have also attracted a younger clientele, which is something that all of these big groups really aspire to. They want to try to get customers in young and then keep them as they get older and spend more money. Some of his signature looks that really captivated people were his first menswear show, where he does the red blouse with the bow for a man, which was kind of this cross-gender dressing that's become very popular in some circles. And also the women, the sort of softer, Tom Ford had made Gucci very edgy and black and sexy. And this is a more romantic, sweeter interpretation of the brand. And then I just want to wrap up this overview with the Centennial Fashion Show, which was absolutely hands down the most outrageous over-the-top show I've ever seen in more than 20 years of covering the fashion industry. They shut down Hollywood Boulevard. They had more than 100 models. They had celebrities, movie stars, directors. It was really quite an event. And I believe you could still stream it on YouTube if you want to go back and look at it. But if you do, you can see that, to me, this really represents how Gucci has connected its past with its present. And you see the iconic GG products, you see the horsebit loafers, but you also see the sleek Tom Ford velvet suit. So Gwyneth Paltrow is wearing this red velvet suit that comes from the Tom Ford era. You see the models wearing the aviator glasses that were the glasses that Maurizio wore, but then you also see them wearing the Tom Ford version. So it's almost as though they've been able to kind of knit everything together seamlessly. So that's where I wrap up, and I'm going to hand it back to Julia to take questions and comments and anything that you guys are interested in exploring.
Yeah, Sarah, that was awesome. Thank you. Thank you. That was really great to hear about the family. I have not read your book, sadly, yet. But it's just a fascinating story. So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat here. I'll help facilitate. Maybe to just kick us off here. I'm not sure how familiar you are with other Italian families. How do they compare to the Guccis? Is it, in your experience, of course, working in the industry for so long, just your quick thoughts on how they compare?
Well, definitely Gucci, the conflict among the Guccis was extreme, and they were really over the top in every way. And in fact, I did an interview with Italian Rai TV, which is going to be broadcast tomorrow. And they asked me, did I think that, the Guccis were stereotyped in the movie? And I thought, you cannot make these characters up. They were larger than life. And I don't think you can say, sons sending their fathers to jail is a stereotype, of an Italian family way of doing business. I do think that there is conflict, a certain level of conflict in all families, but I think that the Gucci story was really made public because they were so litigious. And so a lot of the information that came out actually came out through the court papers and the court filings. I also wanted to mention an example of a family company that I thought has been really successful at negotiating this generational change, and that's Zegna, the men's suit maker, Ermenegildo Zegna. And the first generation was genius. They developed these quality textiles and the workmanship, the tailoring. And the current CEO, Gildo Zegna, is also named for the founder. Is an astute businessman. He's got a global perspective. He understands markets. They've brought in, extremely talented managers and creative people. So there are success stories too. It's not all dysfunction.
Well, that's good to hear. We've got several questions coming in. First one from Charlene. Are there any family members today in the business, or are they just stockholders? What's the relationship now? There's
zero relationship with the family. Maurizio was the last. And if you read the book, one of, to me, the interesting business angles of the story was that he actually brought in an investment bank because he couldn't get his cousins on the same page with him. They were not in agreement with this relaunch plan. And they were making a lot of money from very lucrative licensing agreements. But those agreements had overexposed the brand. And Maurizio really wanted to clean up the market and make it very chic again. And so he brought in an investment bank and bought them all out one by one. It was an 18-month operation. And then he brought in another investment bank as his financial partner. So when Maurizio lost control himself, because he wasn't ultimately able to execute on his plan, he was the last Gucci. There were no more Gucci shareholders. So they've been sort of on the outside looking in since that. Although, I did speak at length with Giorgio Gucci, who was more involved in the Rome business, the Rome stores. And at one point after he sold his shares, he did buy a Tuscan manufacturer, and ended up becoming a manufacturer for luxury brands, including Chanel and Gucci. So the Gucci ended up being the producer for the Gucci brand, even after the family was no longer involved.
How interesting. Alessandra says the book was wonderful. How do you feel about the movie and its adaptation?
Oh, I thought the movie was extraordinary. And first of all, just to have, my work taken up on such a big scale with a director like Ridley Scott and a star-studded cast with Lady Gaga and Adam Driver, and Al Pacino is one of my favorite actors ever, Jeremy Irons. So the movie takes a real slice of the book, and it's the relationship between Maurizio and Patrizia, and it's the family dynamics as seen through their story. And I feel that it really is true to the spirit of that piece of the story. There are things that have been streamlined for the language of the big screen. For example, in the movie, Maurizio has one cousin, Paolo, who was the most dysfunctional, whereas in real life he had three. But to me, that's a perfectly acceptable adjustment because it still tells you the thrust of the story. And there's so much going on even in the movie that it's hard to keep track of everything. And so I think simplifying was a good move. In the movie, Maurizio has one daughter, and in real life he had two. So in the end of the movie, the timeline is collapsed. So you have Maurizio actually overseeing the hit, fashion show that was done by Tom Ford, whereas in the book, Maurizio was already gone, and actually he'd already been murdered by the time Tom has his hit fashion show. So there are those things that are different, but I do think it tells the thrust of the story, with a lot of passion. I mean, I put a lot of passion into researching and writing the book. I think that cast really put a lot of passion into portraying it.
That's great to hear. Our next question is a little more business oriented from Leslie. Gucci needed the American market to survive. Now, does Gucci, along with other French and Italian labels, need the Chinese market to survive?
I mean, they need them all. And absolutely, the Chinese market has become kind of one of the bigger markets. I mean, in the older days, it was Japan. But when China came on, obviously that's kind of the holy grail for retail, and it developed also a very sophisticated high-end luxury market. So yes, but it still needs them all.
Cool. So Charlene says, you mentioned that the brand has gotten younger people involved, and she does see this at stores like Dover Street. Some of the items are way out there. So how can they have this market, like kind of very edgy and also wealthy brand seekers?
I think that's really the sort of the incredible equilibrium that they have to hit. And the fact that they're doing it is remarkable. I mean, those sneakers cost like $500 and $600. So one question is, how do young people have the budget for these products? And two, how do you have like the $500 sneaker and, the gala, evening gown, but they've managed to put it all together. And I think the younger, hipper products also have made it cool again. And so even older customers want to have that cool factor. So much of this luxury marketing is about creating like visions in our minds of who we are, who we want to be, what these things say about us. And it's all about getting us to buy stuff we don't really need, right? Because who needs another handbag? But somehow you just think you have to have it.
It's really incredible. I'm always so surprised how on target all of my ads and marketing are. So no, they're getting it right. Joan asked, do you know what Maurizio's daughters are doing today? Are they involved in the fashion industry at all?
So the daughters are living in Switzerland and they're keeping a very low profile. Alessandra, the oldest daughter, at one point had launched her own line of handbags, but this was probably more than 10 years ago. I think that's been discontinued. Allegra had opened a restaurant in St. Moritz, near where the family compound. I don't know if that's still open or not. Last time I checked, it still was, but then we had COVID. So, but they've been keeping a low profile, and they're not involved in the fashion business today, as far as I know. The other thing about Allegra is that she's also been very passionate about maintaining her father's historic yacht, the Creole, and this is an incredibly beautiful ship. It's got 3 wooden masts. 20 some sails, a crew, and she has raced it in historic regattas. And so if you Google the Creole and Allegra Gucci, you'll see some of the stories about her, and she keeps it going in the spirit of her father.
That's awesome. Camilla asks, what was the real motivation for the murder?
Oh, that's the $60,000 question, $60 million question. So I really tried to explore and unravel Patrizia's character in the book, because I think Maurizio was the character who kind of pulled me into writing the book. She was the one who was the most, I wrestled with the most. And I would describe her character as a kind of, the Italians expression, chiaroscuro, light and dark. And she, she did love Maurizio. She was also very hurt by him. He was not there the day that she was operated on for a brain tumor, and went off to surgery not knowing if she was going to come out alive, and he didn't show up. She thought even though they were divorced at that point, he was still the father of their daughters. So she began to nurture a very deep anger, and it became an obsessive anger. Now, a lot of people said, well, she was crazy, and she actually mounted an insanity defense in the trial. And the judge ordered a court appointed psychiatric evaluation of her. And they determined that she was not crazy. The expression in Italian is capace di intendere e volere. So to be intentional and to want. They found that she had that. And yet they found that she had what they called a narcissistic personality disorder. And so the way they explained that was that when things were going well in her life, everything was fine and she was happy and content and serene. But when things started to go against her and she started to lose, the name, the access to the assets, this luxury lifestyle, she had an outsized, exaggerated response. It was though all of these things were personal attacks on her. And this became an obsessive hatred. I can still remember typing some of the words. She was so angry at Maurizio that she would record cassette tapes. In those days we didn't even have voicemail, I don't think, although they put this as a scene on voicemail in the movie. She would record cassette tapes and mail them to him. And there was one where she says, Maurizio, l'inferno per te è ancora da arrivare. So the inferno for you is yet to come. And I remember typing that into, my computer when I was writing the book. And that's actually one of the scenes in the movie. So to get to sort of a long answer to the question, the judge in the case, when he was issuing her sentence, he said Maurizio Gucci didn't die for who he was. maybe he was an imperfect father, an imperfect husband, but he was trying. He died for what he had. So a big name and a big patrimony. And I think the other explanation I would add to that is that Maurizio was spending money like it was water. And when he died, he had $150 million in the bank from the sale of his 50% stake to Investcorp. He was spending money hand over fist on the Creole, the yacht, on restructuring a luxury apartment on Corso Venezia in Milan. And I think there could have been a real fear on Patrizia's part that there wasn't going to be anything left for her and her daughters. And so she very much presented herself as being protective of her daughters at that time.
And that, I think that ties in well to our next question from Connie Morella. What is Patrizia doing now? What did you come away with after your interview with her?
So Patrizia is now living free in Milan. She's not working, although she did have a stint when she was doing her parole, working for an Italian jewelry company, and she helped them design a line of jewelry. And just to go back, sort of to knit these two questions together, I do think it's important to say, while we can try to understand how a woman could get to the point of doing what she did, and I think as a writer and as a society, it's important to understand what could push somebody, over the edge to that extent. At the same time, it's important not to condone it. I mean, I think that what she did was unthinkable. And I think she herself has ultimately come to regret what she did. At one point, she gave an interview to Italian television, and they asked her, if you could speak to Maurizio now, what would you say to him? And she said, "Forgive me." So I think that, she had time in jail to really reflect on her life.
Wow.
I'm not sure I answered the second part of that question.
The second part was, what did you come away with after your interview with her?
My interview. Yes. So I interviewed her in 1993 before any of the tragic events. And this was because this was at the stage where Maurizio was struggling to hold on to the company. It was clear he was, on the outs with his partner. He had debts, he had money problems, and she was furious with him. And she had launched a smear campaign with the media in Milan. I was the bureau chief of Women's Wear Daily at the time, which also the Fairchild publications, which owned it at the time, also had W magazine. And so she called my editors at W and wanted to give an interview. So they asked me to go. I went to her apartment, penthouse apartment in Piazza San Babila. There was a Galleria Passerella overlooking the square, and sat with her for over an hour. And she just ranted against Maurizio. It was just pure vitriol. She said things like, he's like the seat cushion that takes the impression of the last person who sat on him. I mean, this is the kind, she had a very sharp tongue, very clever, very sharp, but very cutting. So ultimately, my editors decided not to publish the story because it was really a pure hit job. But I saved my notes, and I had I jotted down what she looked like, what the furniture looked like. She had these incredible, like, overstuffed pink and blue and yellow couches, the wraparound terrace all around. It was an incredible, incredible apartment. Then I tried to interview her several times after she was arrested and was in jail. But the prison authorities consistently refused an interview. They were very concerned that she might use her name and her wealth and her power to sort of have a platform. And I went to the jail authorities. I went to the Justice Department in Rome, and I even went to some lawmakers to see if they could help me gain access. And the answer was each time was no. So at that point, I wrote her a letter, and I asked her if she would write to me. And she did. So I had a jailhouse correspondence with her, and over several months, during which she talked about her early years with Maurizio. And in one of the letters, she said, Maurizio was still the man I loved the most, despite all of his mistakes. So that was helpful, and that's all sort of sprinkled through the book.
Very cool. And so I think we have what will be our final question of the evening here from Carla. Does Patrizia have a relationship with her daughters?
So she's given several interviews in which she said that they've been estranged. There was actually a lawsuit. The daughters filed suit against her. So because they wanted to stop the support payments that they owed her through the divorce agreement that she made with Maurizio back in 91. They ultimately lost that case. It went all the way up to Italy's highest court. And the court said no matter what she had done after, that didn't annul the marriage agreement. So they were supposed to pay. They owed her something like 26 million francs in back payments from the time that she was in jail. But I have heard through sources that they do see each other, and maybe that's a more recent phenomenon. So I can't tell you directly because, as I said, they're keeping very private and have not granted interviews about their story or their relationship with their mom.
Very cool. Well, thank you, everyone. This was a fantastic presentation, Sara. Thank you. This was a great discussion. I loved everyone's questions. I do want to give a little plug. I know Sara mentioned this, but she will be, she was interviewed on will be on Rai TV tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. if you want to listen to her discuss House of Gucci some more. And I also want to plug NOIAW's annual luncheon is on Thursday, May 5th this year. Mark your calendars. It's going to be in person in New York, which is very exciting. Be good to see everyone again. So do put that away for in the next couple months or so. But I really appreciate everyone participating and listening. And again, this was recorded in case you want to rewatch it later. But thank you, Sara, so much. I'll leave you with the final comments for us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for your great questions. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Sara Gay Forden. And I'm doing a little feature where I have key locations that are in the book with quotes, pull out quotes from the story if you want to see some of the scenes that I talk about in the book. And also I have a website, saragayforden.com, which includes some photos. You know, in those years, we didn't take pictures of ourselves, like there were no selfies or social media, so I had to go digging through boxes. But I did manage to find some photos of covering the Italian fashion industry in those years. So those are kind of fun to reminisce about.
That's awesome. So I put both your Instagram and your website in the chat here so everyone can access that, copy it, put it in your web browser. Thank you so much, Sara, for sharing all of your knowledge with us. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful Thursday evening, folks.